Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In Surah An-Nisa verses 58 to 62, the Quran says, "Indeed, Allah commands you to render trusts to whom they are due, and when you judge between people, to judge with justice. Excellent is that which Allah instructs you. Indeed, Allah is ever hearing and seeing. O you who have believed, obey Allah and obey the Messenger and those in authority amongst you. And if you disagree over anything, refer it to Allah and the Messenger. If you should believe in Allah and the last day, that is the best way and the best in result. Have you not seen those who claim to have believed in what was revealed to you and what was revealed before you? They wish to refer legislation to Taghut, while they were commanded to reject it, and Satan wishes to lead them far astray. And when it is said to them to come to what Allah has revealed and to the Messenger, you see the hypocrites turning away from you in aversion. So how will it be when disaster strikes them because of what their own hands have put forth, and then they come to you swearing by Allah, we intended nothing but good conduct and accommodation." Now, after explaining to us our rights, the Islamic laws, and how we should always speak and follow the truth, upholding justice, the next problem is how to deal with a situation that is not clearly mentioned in the Quran or Sunnah. In other words, the Quran is valid for all time. It considers all possible circumstances and events that might affect a society. However, sometimes, due to innovation in technology, there are some products or services that stir confusion as to whether or not they are halal. For example, many financial instruments are available for people to invest in. Such instruments did not exist 1400 years ago. Therefore, trying to understand if it is halal or not can be cumbersome. Similarly, TVs, cameras, smartphones, these are all innovations which could bring about much good, but also much harm. So to know exactly where to draw the line can be difficult, particularly since these products are not mentioned in the Quran or Sunnah. So Allah makes it clear that when deciding what to do regarding the permissibility of a product or service, obeying Allah, in other words the Quran, and obeying the Messenger, in other words Hadith and Sunnah, are most important. If a person cannot find the precise answer in the Quran or Sunnah, then those charged with authority amongst us can be obeyed. By that, Allah is referring to the learned scholars or imams. So we can investigate the point of view of different scholars and imams regarding that topic. Now, since Allah has already informed us previously not to trust anyone blindly except the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, a Muslim should critically analyze the opinion of different scholars instead of blindly adhering to one scholar or one school of thought, because scholars are humans. They can make mistakes, or it might be that they had limited knowledge at the time when they passed a decision, and over time, with more knowledge made available, their previous decision might be questionable. So do not blindly adhere to any school of thought or scholar. Listen to them all. Pay attention to the evidence that they are presenting. What is their argument for something being haram or halal? Does it make sense to you? Are they presenting sufficient information from the Quran and Sunnah to justify their beliefs? As I mentioned previously, our instincts can sometimes be the best judge. As the ruh resides in the heart immediately testifies to the truth when it hears it, and it remains in doubt when it hears something that doesn't really make sense. So put aside your biases or ego and critically examine the scholars. Then you can obey the one that you feel is making most sense to you and your heart testifies to it. However, in the event that no scholar seems to have spoken about the issue at hand, or you disagree with the scholars who have presented their opinion because there seems to be no justification to support it, then Allah makes it clear that you should refer back to the Quran and Sunnah. What that means is that even though the exact problem is not mentioned in the Quran and Sunnah, find something that is most relatable and use that as a basis for your ultimate decision. Allah will question you on your intention and your sincerity in finding a right answer. That is all. On the contrary, those who claim to believe but refuse to pay heed to the Quran and Sunnah when judging upon important matters, and instead like to go to Taghut, they are actually hypocrites. Now, Taghut basically implies anything that takes one away from the path of Islam. It encourages you to transgress and go beyond Allah's limits. For example, interest or sood is clearly haram in the Quran. But nowadays, there are so many financial instruments and insurance companies that provide services which did not exist 1400 years ago. So it appears as if they are profitable and they are not involved in sood, but a careful, deeper analysis of the products done by some scholars might reveal that they are interest bearing. So that makes it haram. But many Muslims who are keen to invest in those assets choose to seek the opinion of those who love to spread mischief by promoting haram while calling it halal. When they are told to come to the Quran and Sunnah, they ignore it. Instead, they render their decisions to Taghut. So mischief makers can be an example of Taghut because they are encouraging other Muslims to transgress. They are making something which is clearly haram appear as if it is perfectly halal. So believers who knowingly ignore the Quran and Sunnah and go to Taghut for their decisions are actually hypocrites. And they are hypocrites because they know that there are many scholars who are proving why those particular products are haram, but they choose to ignore those scholars. They choose to find those people online who might be promoting the product as being perfectly halal, even though those people do not present any justification. Even though they have no reason to prove that those things are actually halal, they choose to follow them at that moment because their niyat is they want to invest in those assets. So they are basically just sifting through the scholars and trying to find somebody who calls those assets halal, even though he might have no justification whatsoever. Their hearts know that what they're doing is wrong, but they still choose to do it. Another common example these days is the concept of halal dating. Some Muslims have come up with this notion that as long as zina is not involved and the two are very careful, they can date. They can actually be in a relationship, and that's perfectly fine. This, of course, negates the entire concept of mehram and non-mehram in the Quran. It also challenges the Sunnah because the Prophet, peace be upon him, never allowed any such thing. In fact, based on an authentic hadith, the Prophet told us that it is better for the nail of iron to be driven into the head than for one to touch a woman who is not lawful for him. The Quran also mentions that we should stay far away from zina or anything that might be haram. So how can dating be allowed? With so much evidence against dating, if a Muslim were to go to those who promote halal dating and follow their judgment and decisions, while totally ignoring the evidence presented to him in the Quran and Sunnah, he would be considered a hypocrite who obeys Taghut and not Allah and His Prophet. This is why Allah then tells us that when evil happens to the munafiqs, they should know that it is because of what their own hands have put forth. They did this. Only khair comes from Allah, as later on mentioned in verse 79. But when you deliberately transgress and mock Allah's commands in order to follow Taghut and pursue your desires, then bad things will happen. And that's not khair. That is evil happening to you because of what you did. At that moment, don't swear that you did nothing wrong and you were always trying to be a good Muslim. Have the courage to admit that you were wrong and you did this to yourself. You brought this evil onto yourself so that you can finally do tawbah and clean your heart. In fact, this is something that I personally have seen many times when boys and girls are told to not get into relationships because it is not permissible, yet they choose to follow Taghut and start dating. Inevitably, when things go wrong and they are exposed and left alone in depression, they still act confused as to why did Allah do this to them. They say that their intention was always pure. They say that they always prayed to Allah and gave out in sadaqah. They cannot understand that your sadaqah and prayers don't mean anything when you are deliberately transgressing a command of Allah. You cannot follow Allah and Taghut at the same time. Now, of course, we could always ask this question, if something bad happens to me, how do I know if it is khair from Allah or a punishment due to some evil that I did with my own hands? Well, you never will know for sure. But if something bad happens to you, critically examine your past decisions. If you have been transgressing and ignoring Allah's commands on something, Believe me, you will know. Your heart will be testifying to it. So do tawbah and change yourself. Allah will bless you again with His bounties. But if you truly feel that you've not done anything wrong, you've not done anything evil deliberately, then it's just a test to teach you sabr and to bring out the best in you. So be patient and continue being grateful. Assalamu alaikum.